The gunshot that killed Martha Bennett echoed through Sweetwater, Texas, longer than any sound Nora Hayes had ever heard. And 3 years later, in the summer of 1883, she could still hear it ringing in her ears every time someone whispered behind her back. She stood at the counter of Patterson's general store, watching old Mrs. Patterson count out her change with exaggerated slowness, as if touching Nora's hand might somehow contaminate her soul. The other women in the store had fallen silent the moment Nora walked in, their conversations dying like embers doused with water, and she felt their eyes boring into her back like hot brands. "That will be $2.15, Mrs. Patterson said, her voice clipped and cold as a January morning. She placed the coins on the counter rather than in Nora's outstretched palm, a small cruelty that still managed to sting after all this time. Nora gathered her purchases without a word, tucking the fabric and thread into her worn canvas bag. She had learned long ago that defending herself only made things worse, that silence was her best armor against the judgment of Sweetwater's fine citizens. Martha had been the daughter of the town's wealthiest banker, and Nora had been the dressmaker's apprentice who corrupted her, or so the story went. Never mind that they had loved each other with a fierceness that made the sun seem dim. Never mind that Martha's own brother had been the one to pull the trigger when he found them together, or that he had claimed it was an accident and walked free while Nora had been branded with shame. The heat hit her like a physical force when she stepped outside, the Texas sun merciless in its late afternoon intensity. Main Street stretched before her, dusty and mostly empty in the oppressive heat, with false-fronted buildings casting sharp shadows across the packed earth. A handful of horses stood tied at hitching posts, their tails swishing lazily at flies, and somewhere in the distance she could hear the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer. She had barely taken 3 steps when she heard the commotion. A horse was rearing and bucking near the saloon, a magnificent chestnut stallion with a white blaze down its face, and a man was being dragged alongside, his boot caught in the stirrup. People were shouting, but no one was moving to help, frozen by fear or shock or simple self-preservation. Nora did not think. She dropped her bag and ran toward the panicked animal, her skirts flying behind her. She had grown up on a ranch before her father lost everything to drought and debt, and she knew horses better than she knew most people. The stallion's eyes were rolling white with terror. Its nostrils flared, and she could see a deep gash on its flank where something had torn the hide. "Easy now," she called out, her voice steady and low. "Easy, boy. Nobody's going to hurt you." She approached from the side, moving slowly despite the urgency pounding in her chest. The man being dragged had gone limp, either unconscious or playing dead to avoid spooking the horse further. His hat had fallen off, revealing dark hair matted with dust and sweat. "That is right. Easy now," Nora continued, stepping closer. The horse's ears swiveled toward her voice, and she saw the moment its panic began to shift into uncertainty. She kept talking, nonsense words and soothing sounds until she was close enough to reach for the trailing reins. Her fingers closed around the leather, and she held on as the horse tried to bolt again. Pain shot through her shoulders as she was jerked forward, her boots sliding in the dust, but she did not let go. She kept her voice calm, kept murmuring to the frightened animal, and gradually, impossibly, the stallion began to settle, to eat. When the horse finally stood still, sides heaving and coat dark with sweat, Nora quickly moved to free the trapped man. His boot was wedged deep in the stirrup, and she had to work the leather carefully to get it loose. The moment he was free, 2 men rushed forward to carry him toward the doctor's office, and Nora was left standing alone with the trembling horse. She ran her hands over its neck, checking for injuries, and found the source of its terror. A deep cut on its hindquarters, jagged and bleeding, the kind of wound a sharp nail or piece of broken wood might make. The horse must have backed into something and panicked. "Someone should tend to this," she said to no one in particular. The small crowd that had gathered was already dispersing, now that the excitement was over. No one thanked her. No one even looked at her directly. "I will take him." The voice was rough and warm, like whiskey aged in oak barrels. Nora turned to find a man standing a few feet away, watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He was tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of summer storms. A cowboy, clearly, from his worn leather chaps and the dust coating his clothes. He could not have been much older than 30, perhaps 28 or 29, with the kind of face that looked like it smiled often despite the serious expression he wore now. "That is your horse?" Nora asked, though she already knew the answer. There was a connection between them, visible in the way the stallion's ears pricked forward at the sound of the man's voice. "His name is Thunder," the cowboy said, stepping closer. "And I owe you my life, ma'am. That was the bravest thing I have seen in a long while." Nora felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. Anyone would have done the same. "No," he said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made her look up and meet his eyes. "They would not have. They were all just standing there watching. But you ran toward the danger without hesitation." She did not know what to say to that, so she turned her attention back to the horse. "He has a nasty cut on his hindquarters. It needs to be cleaned and dressed, or it will get infected. I am staying at the boarding house on 3rd Street. Mrs. Cooper has a small stable out back. Would you be willing to help me tend to him?" The cowboy paused, then extended his hand. "I am James Dalton. I just rode in this morning from Montana, heading south toward the border." Nora hesitated before taking his hand. His grip was firm and calloused, the hand of a man who worked hard for his living. Nora Hayes. She watched his face carefully for any flicker of recognition, any sign that he had heard the stories about her. But his expression remained open and friendly, with a warmth in his eyes that made something tight in her chest begin to loosen. "Well, Miss Hayes, I would be mighty grateful for your help. I can pay you for your time." "That is not necessary," Nora said quickly. "I'm happy to help." She gathered Thunder's reins and began leading him down the street, acutely aware of James Dalton walking beside her. He moved with a slight limp, favoring his right leg, and when she glanced over, she saw his pants were torn at the knee, blood seeping through the fabric. "You are hurt," she said. "You should see the doctor." "Doc Mitchell is probably still busy with Jake, the fellow who got dragged before I did," James said with a rueful smile. "Besides, it is just a scrape. I have had worse." "At least let me clean it when we tend to your horse," Nora insisted. "The last thing you need is an infected leg slowing you down on your journey." They walked in companionable silence for a few minutes, passing the feed store and the sheriff's office. Nora was intensely conscious of people watching them, of curtains twitching in windows, and conversations stopping as they passed. She knew what they were thinking, what they were already saying. That shameful Hayes woman corrupting another innocent soul. "You are not from Sweetwater," James said, and it was not quite a question. "I've been here for 5 years," Nora replied carefully. "I work as a seamstress now. I do mending and make dresses for some of the families in town." "Some of them, but not all," James observed. There was no judgment in his tone, only curiosity. "That seems strange, given how talented you must be. That is a beautiful dress you are wearing." Nora glanced down at her simple blue calico dress, startled by the compliment. She had made it herself, true, with careful attention to the fit and finishing, but she had not expected anyone to notice. "Thank you." They reached Mrs. Cooper's boarding house, a 2-story structure with peeling white paint and a sagging front porch. The stable behind it was small but clean, with 4 stalls and a tack room that smelled of leather and hay. James led Thunder into an empty stall while Nora retrieved a bucket of clean water from the pump. Working together, they cleaned the horse's wound. Nora's hands were steady as she gently washed away the blood and dirt, her touch light and sure. Thunder stood quietly as if he understood they were trying to help him. James watched her work with an expression she could not quite read, something between admiration and curiosity. "You have a gift with horses," he said. "Where did you learn?" "My father raised horses when I was young," Nora said. "Before we lost the ranch, he taught me everything about them, how to read their moods, how to handle them when they are scared or hurt." She paused, then added quietly, "They are easier to understand than people, most of the time. More honest." James was silent for a moment, and when she glanced up, she found him watching her with those storm-gray eyes. "What happened to make you think that?" The question was gentle, but it still felt like a knife slipping between her ribs. Nora focused on wrapping a clean bandage around Thunder's hindquarters, tying it off securely. "That is a long story, Mr. Dalton, and not a pleasant one." "James," he corrected. "Just please call me James, and I have got time if you're willing to share it." Nora finished with the horse and stepped back, wiping her hands on a rag. She should make an excuse and leave. She should not let herself care what this stranger thought of her, should not let hope kindle in her chest like a dangerous flame. But there was something about James Dalton that made her want to trust him, something in his steady gaze and quiet manner that reminded her of what kindness looked like. "Let me tend to your leg first," she said, deflecting. "Then we can talk." James sat on a hay bale and rolled up his torn pant leg, revealing a nasty scrape that ran from his knee to his shin. Nora knelt beside him with a bucket of water and a clean cloth, her fingers gentle as she cleaned the wound. She was aware of his eyes on her, of the way he held very still under her touch, and something electric seemed to hum in the air between them. "You are good at this too," James said softly. "Taking care of things, taking care of people." "I do what needs to be done," Nora replied. She finished cleaning the scrape and wrapped it with a strip of clean bandage she kept in her sewing bag. "There. That should hold until you can get to the doctor if it starts to trouble you." She started to stand, but James caught her hand gently. "Wait, please." Nora froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. James was looking at her with such open warmth that it made her chest ache. No one had looked at her like that in 3 years, not since Martha. "I saw the way people treated you in town," James said quietly. "The way they looked at you, or refused to look at you. I have traveled enough to recognize that kind of cruelty." He paused, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture that was probably unconscious. "Whatever they think you did, whatever story they have told themselves about you, I do not believe it. I saw your courage today. I saw your kindness. That tells me more about who you are than any gossip ever could." Nora felt tears prick at her eyes, hot and unexpected. She blinked them back fiercely. "You do not know me, James. You do not know what I have done." "Then tell me," he said simply. "Let me decide for myself." And so she did. Sitting there in the dim coolness of the stable, with dust motes dancing in the slanted sunlight and Thunder munching hay in his stall, Nora told James Dalton everything. She told him about Martha Bennett, about how they had met when Martha came to the dress shop for a fitting. She told him about the long conversations that turned into stolen moments, about how friendship had deepened into something more, something fierce and consuming and beautiful. She told him about the day Martha's brother had found them kissing in the barn behind the Bennett house, about the rage in his eyes and the gun in his hand. She told him about the shot that rang out, about Martha crumpling to the ground with blood spreading across her chest like a crimson flower. She told him about the trial, about how Charles Bennett had claimed the gun went off accidentally, about how the jury had believed him because he was a man and the son of wealth and power. And she told him about the aftermath, about how the town had turned on her, how people said she had corrupted Martha, seduced her, led her into sin, how she had lost her position at the dress shop and had to take in mending and alterations just to survive, how women crossed the street to avoid her and men looked at her with a mixture of disgust and curiosity as if she were something exotic and shameful at the same time. "I should have left," Nora said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I should have gone somewhere else, started over where no one knew me, but I could not. Martha is buried here in the cemetery on the hill. Leaving felt like abandoning her all over again. James had listened to the entire story without interruption, his expression growing darker as she spoke. When she finally fell silent, he was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as if he were chewing on difficult thoughts. "That is the most wrong thing I have ever heard," he said finally, his voice rough with anger. "That man killed someone he was supposed to protect, someone he was supposed to love, and he walks free while you carry the shame? While you are punished for having the courage to love openly?" "It was not courage," Nora said bitterly. "We were careful. We hid. We knew what would happen if anyone found out, but we were not careful enough." "No," James said firmly. He reached out and took both her hands in his, waiting until she met his eyes. "Listen to me, Nora. Love is always courage, especially love that the world tells you is wrong. In your past, everything you have survived, it does not make you shameful. It makes you braver now." The words hit Nora like a physical blow, knocking the breath from her lungs. She stared at James, at this stranger who had ridden into town just hours ago and was looking at her like she was something precious rather than something broken. Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot and fast, and she could not stop them. James pulled her into his arms, and Nora let herself collapse against his chest, sobbing out 3 years of pain and loneliness and grief. He held her gently, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring soft words she could not quite hear over the sound of her own crying. And for the first time since Martha died, Nora felt like maybe, just maybe, she was not completely alone. When the storm of tears finally passed, Nora pulled back, embarrassed and exhausted. "I am sorry," she mumbled, wiping at her face with the back of her hand. "I did not mean to fall apart like that." "Do not apologize," James said. He produced a clean handkerchief from his pocket and handed it to her. "You have been carrying that weight alone for too long. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let someone else help shoulder the burden." Nora looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something shift inside her chest. She was not sure what she was feeling. This strange mixture of gratitude and curiosity, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. She knew she should be careful, should protect herself, but James Dalton had shown her more kindness in one afternoon than the entire town of Sweetwater had shown her in 3 years. "Why are you being so nice to me?" she asked. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," James said, "and I have learned that life is too short and too hard to waste time on judgment. We all deserve kindness, especially those of us who have been hurt the most." He stood up, testing his weight on his injured leg, and offered her his hand. "It is getting late. Let me walk you home, if you will let me." Nora hesitated, then took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. They checked on Thunder one more time, making sure he had enough water and feed, and then stepped out into the early evening. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold, painting the sky in shades of fire, and the oppressive heat of the day was finally beginning to ease. They walked slowly through town, and Nora directed James to the small house she rented on the outskirts of Sweetwater. It was a modest structure, barely more than a cabin, with a small porch and a garden plot where she grew vegetables. But it was hers, paid for with her own labor, and she had made it as comfortable as she could with curtains sewn from scraps and furniture rescued and repaired. "This is lovely," James said, looking around at the neat garden and the flowers she had planted along the fence. "You have made it a real home." "I try," Nora said. She stood on the bottom step of the porch, which put her almost at eye level with James. The setting sun cast his face in warm light, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar. He was handsome, she realized with a start. Not in a polished way, but in the rough, honest way of a man shaped by hard work and open skies. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything, for listening, for believing me, for those words you said. I needed to hear them more than you know. Your past makes you braver now, James repeated, and this time Nora heard the words settle into her bones, felt them begin to heal something she had thought was broken beyond repair. I meant every word. He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch feather-light, and Nora felt her breath catch. There was a question in his eyes, tentative and hopeful, and she found herself leaning closer, drawn by something she could not name. Can I see you again? James asked. Tomorrow, maybe? I should be in town for at least a few more days while Thunder heals. I would like that, Nora heard herself say, very much. James smiled, a slow, genuine smile that transformed his entire face, and Nora felt an answering warmth bloom in her chest. He tipped his hat to her, a gesture that was somehow both old-fashioned and charming, and turned to walk back toward town. Nora watched him go, her hand pressed against her chest where her heart was beating too fast, and wondered what she had just started. The next morning dawned clear and hot, with the promise of another scorching day. Nora woke early, as was her habit, and spent longer than usual deciding what to wear. She finally settled on her green dress, the one with the tiny white flowers embroidered at the collar, and pinned her dark hair up carefully. She told herself she was not primping, that she always took pride in her appearance, but her reflection in the mirror looked unconvinced. She was working on a mending job, repairing a torn sleeve on a shirt, when she heard a knock at the door. Her heart leapt, and she had to force herself to walk calmly to answer it rather than running like a schoolgirl. James stood on her porch, hat in hand, looking freshly washed and almost nervous. He held a small bundle wrapped in paper, and when he saw her, his face broke into that wonderful smile. "Good morning," he said. "I hope I'm not calling too early." "Not at all," Nora said, stepping back to let him in. "I've been up for hours. Come in, please." James entered her small home, his eyes taking in the details with obvious interest. The sewing machine in the corner, the baskets of fabric scraps, the small bookshelf crammed with worn volumes. "You have a nice place here." "Thank you. It is small, but it suits me." Nora gestured to the table. "Would you like some coffee? I just brewed a fresh pot." "That would be wonderful." James set the paper bundle on the table. "I brought you something. Fresh bread from the bakery and some honey. I thought we could have breakfast together if you have not eaten yet." Nora felt warmth spread through her chest. Such a simple gesture, but it had been so long since anyone had thought to do something kind for her. "I have not. This is perfect." They sat at her small table and shared the bread and honey, washing it down with strong black coffee. The conversation flowed easily, moving from topic to topic with the natural rhythm of two people discovering each other. James told her about his life in Montana, about the ranch where he had worked for the past 5 years. He spoke of endless prairies and mountains that touched the sky, of winters so cold your breath froze in the air, and summers where the sun barely set. "Why did you leave?" Nora asked. "It sounds like you loved it there." James was quiet for a moment, his coffee cup cradled between his palms. "I did love it, but the owner died last winter, and his son decided to sell the place. We all got paid out and went our separate ways. I thought maybe it was time for a change, time to see what else was out there." "And what are you looking for?" Nora asked softly. James looked up at her, and there was something vulnerable in his eyes. "I am not sure yet, but I think I will know it when I find it." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility, and Nora felt something flutter in her stomach. She looked away first, taking a sip of her coffee to hide her confusion. She had not expected to feel this way again, had not thought she was capable of it. Martha had been everything, and when she died, Nora had assumed that part of her had died too. But James Dalton was awakening something she thought had been buried with Martha in the cemetery on the hill. It felt like betrayal and rebirth at the same time, and she did not know what to do with the tangle of emotions in her chest. "Tell me about your work," James said. sensing her need to change the subject. What do you like about sewing? Nora relaxed slightly, grateful for the easier topic. I like creating things, taking fabric and thread and turning them into something beautiful and useful. There is a kind of meditation in it, the rhythm of the needle, the way patterns come together. And I like being able to give people something that makes them feel good about themselves, a dress that fits perfectly or makes them feel pretty. You have the soul of an artist, James observed. That is a rare gift. They talked for hours, the conversation meandering through childhood memories and favorite books and dreams for the future. James was easy to talk to, a good listener who asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely interested in her answers. Nora found herself laughing, actual, genuine laughter, and the sound felt rusty and wonderful at the same time. When the sun was high overhead and the heat was becoming oppressive, James suggested they go check on Thunder. They walked to the boarding house together, and Nora felt the familiar weight of disapproving stares as they passed through town. But with James beside her, the judgment felt less crushing somehow, easier to bear. Thunder was doing well, the cut already beginning to heal. The horse nickered when he saw James and nuzzled his shoulder affectionately, and James laughed and produced an apple from his pocket. "Spoiled beast," he said fondly, letting Thunder crunch the apple from his palm. "You know exactly how to get what you want." Nora stroked the horse's neck, admiring his lines and spirit. "He is beautiful. Where did you get him?" "I raised him from a colt," James said. "His mother was a Mustang mare we caught and gentled. He has got her fire and independence, but he is loyal once he trusts you." He paused, then added with a smile, "Kind of like someone else I know." Nora felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You have only known me for a day. You cannot possibly know if I am loyal." "I can see it in you," James said simply. "The way you stayed in Sweetwater for Martha, even when leaving would have been easier. The way you still love her, even though she is gone. That is the deepest kind of loyalty there is." His words made tears prick at Nora's eyes again, but these were different tears, softer somehow. "I will always love her," she said quietly. "What we had was real and true, even if the world did not accept it." "I know," James said. He moved closer, his shoulder brushing hers as they both stroked Thunder's neck. "And I would never ask you to forget her or stop loving her. The heart is big enough for all kinds of love, for the love we have lost and the love we might find again." Nora turned to look at him, her breath catching at how close he was. She could see gold flecks in his gray eyes, could smell the clean scent of soap and leather and something uniquely him. "James, I do not know if I can do this, if I can open myself up like that again." "I am not asking you to know," James said gently. "I am just asking you to try, to give yourself permission to feel something again, whatever that might be." He reached up and cupped her cheek, his palm warm and calloused. "You deserve happiness, Nora. You deserve to be loved and cherished, not hidden away and ashamed." Before Nora could respond, before she could overthink it, James leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle and tentative, a question rather than a demand, and Nora felt something inside her crack open. She kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, and let herself feel the warmth of another person, the comfort of being wanted. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. "I know it is too soon," he murmured. "I know we barely know each other. But I cannot help what I am feeling, Nora. From the moment I saw you run toward that panicked horse, fearless and brave, I knew you were someone special." "I am terrified," Nora admitted, her voice shaking. "I am terrified of feeling this way again, of hoping again. What if it all goes wrong? What if I lose you too?" "You might," James said honestly. "Life does not come with guarantees, but what if it goes right? What if we find something beautiful together? Is not that possibility worth the risk?" Nora looked into his eyes and saw her own fears reflected back at her, but she also saw hope and determination and a tenderness that made her chest ache. James Dalton was not asking her to forget Martha or to pretend the past had not happened. He was asking her to be brave enough to step into the future, carrying her scars and her history with her. "Yes," she whispered, "it is worth the risk." Over the next few days, James and Nora were inseparable. He helped her with her work, sitting in her kitchen and keeping her company while she sewed, telling her stories that made her laugh until her sides hurt. She showed him the hidden places around Sweetwater, the creek where the water ran clear and cold, the meadow filled with wildflowers that bloomed despite the harsh climate. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's quirks and habits. James had a habit of running his hand through his hair when he was thinking hard about something. Nora hummed while she worked, old songs her mother had taught her. James took his coffee with sugar but no milk. Nora liked to watch the sunrise, the way the light turned everything gold and new. They also talked about the harder things. James told her about his own past, about the childhood spent drifting from town to town with a father who drank too much and a mother who died when he was 12. He talked about the loneliness of the cowboy life, the way you could be surrounded by people and still feel utterly alone. And Nora found herself opening up about Martha in a way she never had before, sharing the happy memories alongside the grief, letting herself remember the joy as well as the pain. "She would have liked you," Nora said one evening as they sat on her porch, watching the sunset in streaks of pink and orange. "She always said I needed someone who could keep up with my stubborn streak." James laughed. "I have noticed that about you. You have opinions, and you are not afraid to share them." "Is that a problem?" Nora asked, though there was a teasing note in her voice. "Not even a little bit," James said. He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I like that you know your own mind. I like that you do not back down from things even when they scare you." Nora squeezed his hand, marveling at how natural it felt to touch him, to be close to him. A week ago, she would have said she would never feel this way about anyone again, especially not a man. But James was different. He saw her, really saw her, not as someone to be saved or fixed, but as someone whole and worthy just as she was. "I have been thinking," James said, his tone suddenly serious. "Thunder is healed enough to travel, and I should probably be moving on soon. But I do not want to leave you, Nora. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other for a few days, but I cannot imagine riding out of Sweetwater without you." Nora's heart began to race. "What are you saying?" James turned to face her fully, both hands holding hers now. "I am saying, come with me. Leave this town that has treated you so poorly and see what else the world has to offer. We could go to California or up to Oregon or anywhere you want. We could start fresh somewhere together." "James," Nora breathed, torn between longing and fear, "I cannot just leave. I have my work here, my house, and Martha is buried here." "Martha is not in that grave," James said gently. "She is in your heart, and you will carry her with you wherever you go. As for your work, you are a talented seamstress. You could find work anywhere. Or I could support us both until you get established. And the house?" He shook his head. "That is just wood and nails, Nora. Home is not a place. It is the people who love us." Tears streamed down Nora's face, but for once they were not tears of pain. "You really mean it? You want me to come with you?" "I want you to marry me," James said, and his voice was steady and sure. "I know it is crazy and fast, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Nora Hayes. I love your courage and your kindness and the way you hum when you sew. I love your stubborn streak and your fierce loyalty and the way you see the best in everything, even after the world has tried to break you. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life showing you how much you are worth." Nora could not speak past the lump in her throat. She looked at this man, this wonderful, impossible man who had ridden into her life and turned everything upside down. She thought about Martha, about the love they had shared, and she could almost hear Martha's voice in her head telling her to be brave, to grab this chance at happiness with both hands. "Yes," she finally managed to say, "yes, I will marry you." James let out a whoop of joy and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around on the porch until she was laughing and dizzy. When he finally set her down, he kissed her with a passion that made her toes curl, and Nora kissed him back with everything she had. They were married 3 days later by a traveling preacher who happened to be passing through town. It was a simple ceremony held in Nora's small house, with no guests and no fanfare. Nora wore her best dress, the blue one with the lace collar she had spent weeks perfecting, and James wore his cleanest shirt and a look of such joy that it made her heart ache. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed her softly, reverently, and Nora felt something settle into place inside her. This was right. This was where she was meant to be. They spent their wedding night in Nora's bed, and James was gentle and patient, letting her set the pace. Nora had been nervous, uncertain how she would feel being with a man after only ever being with Martha. But James made her feel safe and cherished, his hands and mouth worshipful as they explored each other. When they finally came together, it was with a tenderness that brought tears to Nora's eyes, and afterwards James held her close, whispering how much he loved her until she fell asleep in his arms. The next morning they began preparations to leave Sweetwater. Nora sold most of her furniture and household goods, keeping only what they could carry on a small wagon James purchased. She packed her sewing supplies carefully, along with her few precious books and the quilt Martha had given her, the only physical reminder she had left of their love. On the day before they were set to leave, Nora walked alone to the cemetery on the hill. She knelt beside Martha's grave, the headstone simple and stark, and let herself cry one last time for what they had lost. "I am leaving," she said softly, her fingers tracing Martha's name carved in stone. "I am leaving with a good man who loves me, and I'm going to try to build a new life. I hope you understand. I hope you would want this for me." The wind picked up, rustling through the grass, and Nora chose to take it as a sign. She kissed her fingertips and pressed them to the headstone, then stood and walked away without looking back. James was waiting for her at the cemetery gate, Thunder and the wagon hitched and ready. He did not say anything, just pulled her into a hug and let her lean on him until she was ready to move on. They rode out of Sweetwater as the sun was rising, painting the world in shades of gold and rose. A few people watched them go, curtains twitching in windows. But Nora did not care anymore. She was done with Sweetwater and its judgment, done with living small and afraid. She was choosing brave. They traveled west, following the sun toward California and new beginnings. The journey was long and often difficult, with days of baking heat and nights so cold they huddled together for warmth. But there was also beauty in the vast landscapes they crossed. The endless sky and rolling plains, the mountains that rose like giants against the horizon. James was a good traveling companion, steady and unflappable when things went wrong, and quick with a joke when spirits flagged. He taught Nora how to shoot a rifle, patient and encouraging as she learned to hit targets. She taught him more about sewing, and he surprised her by being quite good at mending leather, his hands deft with needle and thread. They stopped in small towns along the way, staying just long enough to earn a bit of money before moving on. Nora would take in sewing work, and James would hire on for odd jobs, fixing fences or breaking horses. In each place they were just another couple passing through, and the anonymity was liberating. No one knew her history or judged her for her past. She was just Nora Dalton now, a seamstress traveling with her cowboy husband, and that was enough. At night, lying under the stars with James's arms around her, Nora would think about how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been alone and miserable, trapped in a town that hated her, with no hope for anything better. Now she was traveling across the country with a man who loved her, heading toward a future full of possibility. "What are you thinking about, Ian?" James asked one night, his breath warm against her hair. How lucky I am, Nora said softly. How grateful I am that your horse spooked that day, that you stayed in Sweetwater long enough for us to meet. James tightened his arms around her. I am the lucky one. You are the bravest person I know, Nora. The way you have survived everything you went through, the way you were willing to risk your heart again, that takes more courage than most people ever find. Your past makes you braver now, Nora quoted with a smile. Someone very wise told me that once. He sounds like a smart fellow, James said with a laugh. You should probably keep him around. I plan to, Nora promised, and sealed it with a kiss. They finally settled in a small town in Northern California called Redwood Springs, nestled in the foothills where the climate was cooler and trees grew tall and green. The town was prosperous but not large, with a mix of loggers, farmers, and merchants, creating a diverse community that felt welcoming after the closed-minded atmosphere of Sweetwater. James found work at a nearby ranch, his experience and skill with horses making him invaluable. Nora opened a small shop on Main Street. Offering sewing and dressmaking services, her talent quickly became known, and within a few months she had more work than she could handle. The women of Redwood Springs were friendly and curious, eager to support a new business, and Nora found herself making actual friends for the first time in years. They rented a small house at the edge of town, with a view of the mountains and enough land for a garden. James built Nora a proper sewing room, with large windows for light and shelves for all her supplies. Nora made curtains and planted flowers, turning the simple structure into a real home. Their life together was not perfect. They had their disagreements, their difficult days when old wounds ached or money was tight, but they had each other, and they had built something real and solid together, a partnership based on trust and respect and deep, abiding love. A year after they arrived in Redwood Springs, Nora realized she was pregnant. She was terrified at first, unsure if she was ready for motherhood, but James was overjoyed. He fussed over her constantly, making sure she was eating enough and resting enough, his protectiveness both touching and occasionally annoying. I am pregnant, not made of glass, Nora said one evening when James tried to stop her from carrying a basket of laundry. I can still do things. I know, James said, looking sheepish. I just want to take care of you. Is that so wrong? Nora softened, setting down the basket and wrapping her arms around his waist. It is not wrong, it is sweet, but you have to trust me to know my own limits. I do trust you, James said, kissing the top of her head. I just love you so much, it makes me a little crazy sometimes. Their son was born in the spring of 1885, during a rainstorm that drummed on the roof and made the world feel cozy and enclosed. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Nora was certain she could not do it, could not push through the pain. But James never left her side, holding her hand and whispering encouragement. And finally, their baby boy entered the world with a lusty cry that announced his presence to anyone listening. They named him Matthew James Dalton, and he was perfect. He had James's dark hair and Nora's green eyes, and from the moment Nora held him, she understood what it meant to have your heart exist outside your body. She had thought she knew love before with Martha and then with James. But this was different. Fierce and primal and all-consuming. James was a natural father, patient and playful, perfectly content to spend hours making silly faces to get Matthew to smile. Nora would watch them together, her cowboy and their son, and feel a contentment so deep it was almost painful. As Matthew grew from baby to toddler, Nora found herself thinking about Martha less often, though she never forgot her. The quilt Martha had given her covered Matthew's crib, a connection between past and present, and sometimes Nora would tell her son stories about the brave woman who had loved his mother once upon a time. Will you tell him everything? James asked one night. After Matthew had finally fallen asleep, and they were curled up together in their own bed. About you and Martha. About what happened. When he is old enough to understand, Nora said, I want him to know that love comes in many forms and that all of them are valid and beautiful. I want him to grow up without the prejudices that destroyed Martha and nearly destroyed me. "He will," James said confidently, "because he has you as a mother, teaching him to be brave and kind and open-minded." 3 years after Matthew was born, Nora gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Martha Dalton. She had James's gray eyes and Nora's dark hair, and she was as fierce and stubborn as both her parents combined. Matthew adored his little sister, playing with her gently and bringing her toys, and Nora felt her family was complete. Life in Redwood Springs was good. Nora's dress shop thrived, and James was promoted to foreman at the ranch where he worked. They bought the house they had been renting and expanded it, adding another bedroom and a proper porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch their children play. The town had become home in a way Sweetwater never had. Their neighbors were friendly, their children had playmates, and no one cared about Nora's past because they only knew her present. She was Mrs. Dalton, the talented seamstress, James's wife, Matthew, and Sarah's mother. She was respected and liked, and the difference from her old life was so stark it sometimes took her breath away, but she never forgot where she had come from, and she never took her happiness for granted. When she heard whispers about another woman in town, someone whose behavior was considered scandalous, Nora made a point of being kind to her. When a young man was beaten for being too delicate, too feminine, Nora spoke up in his defense, even when it made others uncomfortable. James supported her in this, proud of her compassion and her refusal to let others suffer the way she had suffered. Together they tried to make Redwood Springs a place where people could be themselves without fear, where love in all its forms could flourish. One evening when Matthew was 8 and Sarah was 5, the family sat together on their porch watching the sunset. Matthew was reading aloud from a book, his voice still high and clear with childhood, while Sarah cuddled against Nora's side. James had his arm around Nora, and Thunder grazed peacefully in the pasture beside the house, old now but still strong. "Mama," Matthew said, setting down his book, "are you happy?" Nora looked at her son, at his earnest face and curious eyes, and smiled. "Yes, sweetheart, I am very happy." "Good," Matthew said with satisfaction. "Papa said you were sad before a long time ago, but you are not sad anymore." "No," Nora agreed, looking up at James and seeing her own emotions reflected in his eyes. "I am not sad anymore." That night, after the children were asleep, James and Nora stood together in their bedroom, holding each other close. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked softly. "Leaving Sweetwater, marrying me, building this life?" "Never," Nora said fiercely. She pulled back to look him in the eye. "You saved me, James. You showed me that I could be brave enough to start over, to love again, to believe in happiness. I will never regret choosing you." "Your past makes you braver now," James said, echoing the words he had spoken so long ago, "and our future makes us stronger together." He kissed her then deep and sweet, and Nora kissed him back with all the love and gratitude in her heart. She had lost so much, survived so much, but she had also found so much more than she ever dreamed possible. The years continued to pass, bringing the normal joys and sorrows of life. Matthew grew into a thoughtful young man who inherited his mother's artistic talents and his father's steady temperament. Sarah became a spirited girl who feared nothing and questioned everything, keeping her parents on their toes. James and Nora grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They added laugh lines and gray hairs, earned scars and created memories, built a legacy of kindness and acceptance that rippled through their community. When Matthew was 20 and Sarah was 17, Nora and James became grandparents for the first time. Matthew had married a kind young woman named Elizabeth, and their daughter was born in the same house where Matthew had been born, in the same bed where Nora had labored. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Nora wept tears of joy. She thought about Martha, about the life they might have built together if the world had been kinder, if violence had not cut their love short. She thought about the scared, grieving woman she had been in Sweetwater, trapped and alone. And she marveled at how far she had come, at the beautiful, complex life she had managed to build from the ashes of her pain. "She is perfect," James said, standing beside her and stroking the baby's tiny hand with one finger, "just like her grandmother." "We did good," Nora said softly, "and didn't we? We built something worth having." "We did better than good," James corrected. "We built something extraordinary. We built a home filled with love. We raised good children. We created a family that accepts and celebrates everyone. That is more than most people ever accomplish." Nora leaned into him, her husband of over 20 years, her partner and best friend. "I love you, James Dalton. Thank you for seeing who I was, even when the rest of the world refused to look." "I love you too," James said. "Always have, always will." They stood together in the golden afternoon light, holding their granddaughter between them, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built. And Nora Hayes Dalton, who had once been shunned and broken, who had learned the hard way that love could be both beautiful and dangerous, understood that she had finally found her place in the world. She had survived the worst that life could throw at her, and she had come out the other side stronger, braver, and more whole than she had ever been. Her past had shaped her, taught her resilience and compassion, given her the courage to love again despite the risk. And now, surrounded by the people she loved most in the world, in a town that had become home, and a life that felt like grace, Nora finally allowed herself to believe what James had told her all those years ago in a dusty stable in Sweetwater, Texas. Her past had made her braver, and that bravery had given her everything. As the sun set over the California foothills, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Nora smiled and held tight to the people she loved. This was her happily ever after, hard-won and deeply cherished, built on the foundation of pain, but reaching toward the sky with hope. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.